defense attorney for the officer charged with second-degree murder, says it is questionable whether there was even a knee on Floyd's neck. All of that later on. Now, my next guest was born and raised in Milwaukee, played championship varsity basketball team at Marquette University High School, degree in criminal justice management from Concordia University in Wisconsin, MA in security studies from the Naval Postgraduate School. Started with the Milwaukee PD in 1978. There for 11 years as a patrol officer, promoted to detective, then rank of captain, and became the sheriff and won re-elections in 2006, 2010, 2014. Please welcome to the show, Sheriff David Clarke. Sheriff, thank you very much for taking the time.
Larry, it's an honor, it's a privilege. It's been too long.
Sheriff, did you ever think that people with a straight face would literally talk about, quote, defunding the police, end of quote?
Look, most Americans know this. That's not a serious public policy proposal. That's buffoonery. These people are talking like lunatics. If there's, in many of these ghetto communities ravaged by violent crime, the only thing standing between a good law-abiding, impoverished minority citizen and the violent criminal predator on the street is the American police officer, and more times than not, it's a white police officer.
Sheriff, I don't know how much of the eulogy funeral of George Floyd you watch, but what would you say to people that are in that arena who sincerely feel that there is a real problem in America with officers abusing black people? What would you say to them?
Well, I'd tell them to open their minds and open their eyes and free themselves from the shackles of this liberal ideology, this poisonous, toxic message that's being perpetrated on them, that exists. And I say that because of my experiences, and not only my experiences, but there's no body of evidence, there is no body of data to support the myth, the propaganda, and I'll call it an outright lie, that racism is alive and well in the United States and that it's systemic. It's simply not true because there is no empirical study that can prove that. There's no data to support it. As a matter of fact, the data and evidence and empirical study are on the other side, and we've gotten better as a country.
My guest is Sheriff David Clarke. His website is americascheriff.com. Sheriff, analyze what happened to George Floyd.
Yeah, what happened there, from my eyes anyway, and don't forget 40 years in law enforcement. I understand uses of force. I used to investigate those uses of force, including deadly force. I led a unit in the Milwaukee Police Department in the homicide unit that investigated all deadly uses of force. Excuse me. So I know how these investigations work. But anyway, there is no way to justify what that officer, I don't really even know his name, but the tactic that he used. Okay, it was poor performance. It was a bad tactic. What we train in law enforcement is once you get a guy in custody, once you get him under control and you get him handcuffed, you sit him up. You set him up because of things that we know about, that we've learned the hard way, that there are some phenomena out there. One of them is called positional asphyxia, where a guy could suffocate. If he's on his chest and you're applying pressure, and it could be a minimal amount of pressure, but if his chest can't expand, he will suffocate, okay? And there's also this phenomena called excited delirium, which can cause a heart attack. Now, I don't know which one of those played a role. I have not seen the reports. I haven't interviewed anybody, and I haven't read the autopsy, but that's why we teach law enforcement officers to sit the person upright, and that did not happen. So there's no way for me to justify what I saw, as did millions of other people.
Sheriff Clarke, what's your analysis of the behavior or non-behavior of the three officers who were also present?
Yeah, that's a failure there. I think it's a failure of leadership. You saw some other officers in the scene, but I'll tell you what, I'm not justifying the actions, I'm telling you what I saw. They saw their role as keeping the crowd back, all right, and it was necessary. However, I would like to think that with what was going on and the people yelling, that somebody would have looked over. And, you're supposed to cover each other. You cover each other to make sure that things are going right. And someone could have walked over there and said, hey, let's sit this guy upright, but it didn't happen. So you know, when you see all that, it was like the perfect storm. It was like, you know, all these bad things that could happen happening at once, and it led to the death of George Floyd.
Mm-hmm. Sheriff, you hear all the time that people want the police to, quote, look like the community that they police. In the case of Minneapolis, you have a police chief who is, I understand, Mexican American and black. That doesn't seem to have mattered to the people that are protesting.
No, and that's why I say this whole thing is it's a lie. It's a smokescreen. You're right. Police departments all across the United States now are diversified. They've worked hard to do that. That was necessary. Law enforcement as a profession has gotten better. We're more educated. We're better trained. We're better resourced than we've ever been in our history. Now, that doesn't mean you won't have a bad outcome, you know, here and there. But, you know, life's not perfect. So you're going to get these things from time to time. But, again, if you look at the body of evidence, Larry, the evidence shows that what happened there in Minneapolis was an outlier. It was an anomaly. Fortunately, it is an anomaly. So for people to come along and suggest, and I've heard people say this, when I say people, there was a NFL football player the other day who was being interviewed, and he said when he saw the George Floyd tape, he said he went home and cried that could have been him. And he said, this goes on every day in the United States. Larry, that is a lie. Now, maybe he got caught up in some hyperbole, but I'm going to swat that stuff down because these false narratives, if they're not contested, become what people actually believe.
Sheriff, we only have about 45 seconds left. The chokehold. My friends tell me who are on the police, you get rid of that. You're getting rid of a weapon that the police use so they don't have to use deadlier force, and that they'll have to use something else that the same people will complain about down the road.
Yeah, you know, and that's the double-edged sword here. Sometimes you end up overcorrecting, and you get the law of unintended consequences, and that's why I tell people to move slowly. When you're going to make a policy change based off of one incident, you may end up with the law of unintended consequences.
Sheriff David Clarke, Sheriff, as always, thank you very much for taking the time.
My pleasure, Larry.